Hello and welcome to the qualifying edition of Monaco's race weekend data analysis. What a qualifying we have just had. This is the series in which we'll be compiling all of the qualifying data and comparing each of the teammates together to see how well they have performed at Monaco and also across the entire season as a whole. We'll also be going over the results of my audience prediction series, and my oh my, we have an absolutely enormous spread. Who could have predicted that pole position, and even what happened in qualifying as well? And so without further ado, we will jump on into the qualifying data for the Monaco Grand Prix, and we start with the audience prediction results. And the first time entry for AB Baby puts themselves in P1, heading into tomorrow's scoring their bonus statement, as well as Divot, as well as Evan Darcy, the current championship leader, and also Leroy as well, a Doctor Who channel, also securing their bonus statement as well. And then we have a vast spread, all the way from people scoring 6 points all the way to people scoring 2. Whereas in Spain we saw a very close spread, and Monaco we see a very large spread. And unfortunately I fit myself pretty much down at the bottom. I've scored 4 points out of a possible 10. Not ideal at all. But now we will just quickly recap what exactly happened in qualifying, and we start briefly with Q1. And for the second consecutive race, it is Yuki Tsunoda who is knocked out in Q1, and Fernando Alonso in the Alpine is also out for the first time this year, and also the first time since Mexico 2018? Definitely 2018 though. Nicholas Latifi P18 and Nikita Mazepin last, with Mick Schumacher not running due to the damage in practice 3. Then we head on into Q2, and it is topped by Mr. Charles Leclerc, and out is Esteban Ocon in the other Alpine. A much better performance after their highest of like P14 or something like that in practice, so a little bit better, but not ideal. Through into Q3 though is Antonio Giovinazzi for the first time this year for Alfa Romeo, but Daniel Ricciardo, Mr. Monaco of 2018, is out in Q2, down in P12, ahead of Lance Stroll, Kimi Raikkonen, and George Russell. And so with the top 10 shootout drivers all decided, we then head on into Q3, and it is Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari that gets pole position. They have shown incredible pace this whole weekend, although the pole position is a little bit up for grabs. Is he going to get a 5-place grid penalty with that crash that he had on the exit of swimming pool section? Very similar to the Nicholas Latifi incident. Lots of people have called it a possible Rosberg incident, knowing that Verstappen and even Bottas was on an exceptional lap up until the red flag as well. Could it have been a conspiracy? But looking a bit further down that order, we do have Verstappen P2, Bottas P3, Sainz P4. He was doing exceptionally well as well, separated by just a few thousandths of a second. Then Lando Norris P5, Gasly a mega P6, and Lewis Hamilton, the championship leader, 5 positions behind Max Verstappen in P7, unable to break into the 1-minute 10s at all this weekend. Then Sebastian Vettel P8, Perez down in P9. That is gutting a full second back from Max Verstappen, and Giovinazzi P10. And so mushing all of these times together and creating a progression graph, we can see it visually progressing like this. It was Valtteri Bottas that was leading in Q1, and then unfortunately he did progress, and his times did increase, just not as significantly as Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc in front of him. And then we had a couple of drivers go backwards as well. In the case of Sergio Perez, he had a big steep time loss from Q2 to Q3. And then taking each team's fastest lap time and working out their progression from each session, the most improved team from Q1 to Q2 is actually Aston Martin down at the bottom there. They gained over 0.6 of a second. Ferrari gained half a second, Red Bull just under half a second. And then the most improved team from Q2 to Q3, down at the bottom there, is McLaren, gaining 0.4 from the session to session, with Alfa Romeo and Aston Martin being the only teams to lose time from session to session. And so with the overview of qualifying all done and dusted, along with the recap, we will now be going through the teammate battles. We are going in 2020 championship order. Each of them is linked in the description down below, or timestamped, in the description down below, so you can skip to whichever one you would like me to talk about. But we do start, of course, with Mercedes, and for the first time this season, Valtteri Bottas consistently outperformed Lewis Hamilton this weekend, and not even just. It was a significant margin across the 3 sessions, about half a second. That is significantly faster than the reigning 7-time Formula 1 world champion around Monaco, a track that he enjoys. But not so much this time. It was mainly due to the tyres, but it was quite an interesting session. And we can see, looking at their positions charts all the way on the left, that Monaco is definitely an outliery result for them, especially the case of Lewis Hamilton. Even in Q2 and in Q1 and hell, even in Q3 as well, all 3 of them were an outliery result for Lewis Hamilton. And then taking a look now from Mercedes down to Red Bull, we can really see that significant time loss for Sergio Perez. Now, this was impacted heavily by the red flag at the end of the session, so I'd imagine he would have closed that gap just a little bit from a 9/10 or almost full second gap to perhaps following the similar trend from Q1 to Q2 to maybe 2.5 tenths, which would have put him in the ballpark of P4/P5. But unfortunately, that's the way Formula 1 goes, and he starts P9. And interestingly, in the head-to-head, it is 4-1 to Max Verstappen in every single session so far, with the Q3 advantage in Monaco being the largest advantage so far across this season, with the average across the 4 races previous in Q3 being half a second in Max Verstappen's favour. And interestingly for Sergio Perez, he's actually going backwards in terms of qualifying position if we look at the Q3 graph. He didn't make it through into Bahrain, he then started P2 in Imola, then P4 in Portugal, P8 in Spain, and now P9 in Monaco, which is not an ideal trend to be observing, so hopefully he can pick it back up in Azerbaijan. And then from Red Bull, we take a look at McLaren, and unfortunately for Daniel Ricciardo, he closed the gap a little bit from what we observed in practice, but still, to be half a second down in each session from Lando Norris, something is up. Something is up. He's not comfortable, much like Lewis Hamilton, he is just not comfortable in that car at the moment. And interestingly, in Q2, it is 5-0 to Lando Norris in Q2, but overall, in Q3 so far, it is 3-2 to Daniel Ricciardo. So he still holds the overall outright qualifying head-to-head battle, but it's interesting to see it change as the sessions go on. Then from McLaren, we take a look at Aston Martin, and honestly, this was a great session. I was not expecting either of them, any of them at all, to get into Q3, and it is Sebastian Vettel who finds himself there. And for the first time this weekend, Lance Stroll actually beat Sebastian Vettel in Q1. And then Vettel managed to beat him in Q2 and make it through to Q3, unlike the Canadian. And it is also Aston Martin's highest qualifying position so far this season in P8. And other than that, there really isn't too much else to point out from Aston Martin, apart from it was a very, very good session. And then from Aston Martin, we take a look at pretty much the opposite, Alpine. A very, very disappointing session. Out in Q1 is Fernando Alonso for the first time, like I said in the intro piece, since 2018, and a half a second gap, which is admittedly half a tenth down on the average gap so far. The average gap so far across the season is just over half a second, whereas in Monaco it was just under, so I suppose that is the only positive that he can take from it. And Ocon actually had an okay qualifying, considering where they were in practice. Being P11 isn't too bad. And then from Alpine, we take a look now at Ferrari. What a weekend Ferrari are having. However, it was Charles Leclerc that was consistently 2 tenths faster in every single session than Carlos Sainz, which is a little bit of a surprise from what we saw in practice. I was expecting Sainz to at least lead Leclerc in 1 or 2 of these sessions and perhaps snatch the pole position, and who knows, maybe he could have had Leclerc not put himself in the wall. However, this bodes extremely well for Ferrari's chances tomorrow, and I am very much looking forward to their Grand Prix pace, and interestingly, their gaps have significantly come down, especially in Q1 and Q3, in favour of Charles Leclerc. However, they are a little bit inconsistent if we take a look at their positions charts in both Q1, Q2, and also Q3. They're very, very all over the place. And then from Ferrari, we take a look at Alfa Tauri. And like I said again in the intro piece, for the second consecutive race, it is Yuki Tsunoda that is also knocked out in Q1. And so the qualifying head-to-head is very much dominated by Pierre Gasly. On only the one occasion has Yuki Tsunoda outperformed Gasly in Q1, and that is it. It was over half a second gap in Q1, which is significantly higher than the average Q1 gap in favour of Pierre Gasly so far across the first 4 races. But interestingly, it is Pierre Gasly who does start ahead of Lewis Hamilton, so we can see what he can do from P6 and whether he can work his way forward or whether he can defend extremely well from Lewis Hamilton. And then from AlphaTauri, we take a look at Alfa Romeo, and a large, steep drop-off in pace from Q2 to Q3 for Giovinazzi, but honestly, I expected that. You put all of your effort into your Q2 lap. We see this usually from George Russell. He does extremely well in Q1, and then he doesn't do as extremely well in Q2. It is much the same here, just for Q2 and Q3. Interestingly, the gap was just over 0.2 of a second in favour of Giovinazzi in each session against Kimi Räikkönen, but these gaps have decreased in the first 4 races that we've had so far. And definitely a good opportunity for Alfa Romeo and Giovinazzi to score some points, especially starting P10. And then penultimately for today's episode, we will take a look at Haas. And yeah, there's literally nothing we can really point out. Only one car set a lap time, and that car was then knocked out in Q1. However, it does mean it's the first time that Nikita Mazepin has out-qualified Mick Schumacher. Whether you want to count it as a proper out-qualifying as Schumacher didn't take part or not, it still stands. 4-1 for Mick Schumacher. And then finally, for the qualifying edition of the Monaco race weekend's data analysis, we take a look at Williams. Honestly, I'm a touch on the disappointed side. Once again, it is George Russell who has outqualified Nicholas Latifi. It is now 5-0 in this season, and the gap in Q1 was 0.3 of a second, which is half that, the average over the first 4 races so far. So Latifi is slowly getting closer, just not quite close enough. I was expecting coming into this weekend that they could challenge for Q3, but that was an absolute no-go. Potentially, depending on what happens in the race, they could score some points. And there we go, there is the qualifying edition for the Monaco race weekend data analysis, all done and dusted. What was your favourite part about this qualifying session? Was it the Leclerc crash in Q3, or was it something else? Was it Bottas finally being so much better than Lewis Hamilton? Was it the fact that Hamilton was just struggling in general? Please let me know in the comments down below, and also where you placed in the audience prediction scores. We had over 50 entrants into the contest for one race. That is absolutely insane. Thank you guys so much for the support, and I will catch you in the next episode with whatever and whenever I decide to make it. I'll see you guys then.